Good morning. Great to be with you. I'm Jose Diaz-Balart, kicking off another hour. It's 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, and we're staying on top of a number of stories for you this morning. In about 30 minutes, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Joint Chiefs Chairman Mark Milley will be holding a briefing on the war in Ukraine. They just met virtually with over 40 countries helping Ukraine, and they're reinforcing how much of an impact the aid is making.
Ukrainian armed forces are skillfully using systems both old and new. They've stalled Russia's offensive in the east and continue to seize the initiative. The Ukrainian armed forces will need our sustained support.
We will have the very latest on the region. And from the president's trip overseas in Asia, he's raising eyebrows this morning after saying the U.S. militarily would get involved if China invaded Taiwan. What the White House is now saying about that. Plus, help is on the way for America's families. Tens of thousands of pounds of baby formula just arrived in the U.S. But when will store shelves start filling up again? And we have our eyes on Georgia, where we're a day out from the state's primary elections. Early voting already breaking records there. The anticipation is intensifying in the battleground state. That's precisely where we start this morning. NBC's Vaughn Hilliard is in Atlanta. I'm also joined by Insay Ufot, CEO of the New Georgia Project, a voting rights advocacy group, Greg Bluestein, political reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and an MSNBC political contributor, and Michael Steele, former NRC chairman and an MSNBC political analyst. Well, let me start with you. Other states, including Minnesota, Arkansas, and Alabama have primaries as well, but Georgia is getting a lot of the attention. Take us through the stakes there and the most closely watched races.
Jose, what these next 48 hours will expose is the reality that there are cracks within this Republican Party here today. There is no longer a fealty to Donald Trump that we have seen over the last 6 years, namely among voters here. The state of Georgia, David Perdue, the Trump-backed former senator who decided to challenge the incumbent Republican governor here, Brian Kemp, is likely and is expected to lose tomorrow in a head-to-head matchup here. The latest Fox News poll shows it at 60% to 28%. In going around the state and talking to voters, you consistently hear from them when it comes to Brian Kemp issues, whether it be the heartbeat bill he signed into law in 2019, whether it's the election integrity, the so-called election integrity bill that he signed into law last year, or the way that he opened up business at the height of the pandemic here in 2020. It's those sorts of issues, not the 2020 decision by him to certify the Joe Biden win here in the state of Georgia. At the same time, well, Brian Kemp may win this, and ultimately the Trump-backed David Perdue will lose. You also got to go next door, Alabama, where there is a U.S. Senate race to fill a seat there as well. And it's actually Mo Brooks, the congressman who you'll recall just about 2 months ago lost the endorsement of Donald Trump after he plummeted in polling. Well, guess who has resurrected his campaign? It is Mo Brooks, and there is a good shot tomorrow that he will be one of the top 2 candidates and will head to the runoff. And come next month, Mo Brooks, despite Donald Trump dropping his endorsement of him, could be the Republican nominee for governor or for the U.S. Senate. The one other race, though, I want to mention, though, Jose, tomorrow is the runoff in Texas. When we talk about political dynasties and where the Republican Party stands today, you've got to take into account that George P. Bush is on the ballot running against Ken Paxton, a fellow Republican, for Attorney General there. Right now, he is expected and most likely will not pull off a victory tomorrow. When you look at the Bush family, it dates back to Prescott Bush, back when he was first elected as U.S. Senator in Connecticut. 70 years later, there's the potential that come tomorrow that a Bush may no longer be serving in office.
Fascinating recap there. Early voting in Georgia is up 212% from 2020, according to the Secretary of State's office. Total turnout, more than 857,000, more than 795,000 have voted early in person. More than 61,000 have voted absentee. What do you read into all of this?
What I read into it is, one, as we've said before, the reversal of the Great Migration is still alive. People are continuing to move into our great state and registering to vote and becoming voters. I think, two, there's tons of our research, but also independent research conducted by Campaigns and Error to say that democracy is on the ballot. And so in the aftermath of this trash anti-voting bill that was passed in 2021 by Georgia Republicans, SB 202, that Georgians know that their vote is powerful, and they also know that there are Republican bad actors who are trying to mute the power and mute the impact of their votes. And so they are turning out because they know that to make sure that the will of the people is reflected in the results of our elections, that we are going to have overwhelming participation to overcome some of these voter suppression laws.
Yeah, and Michael, I mean, Republicans are, I guess, seeing more early voter turnout than Democrats. The Secretary of State's office tallied more than 483,000 Republican early votes, nearly 369,000 Democratic votes. What do you make of this early Republican lead? Is that because of the changes?
I think a little bit of that. I think it's also a recognition that the lie, in addition to the other lies that were told during the 2020 cycle, the one that said early voting and vote by mail were not a viable option for a Republican Party or Republican base, I think people are throwing it out the window. They looked across the aisle and saw what Democrats were doing, what they were doing very effectively. And so there has been a surge in that ground game to turn that vote out. I think all of this sets up very interestingly for a replay of Kemp and Stacey Abrams in the fall for governor, because that's where the real metal to the work of Ms. Ufat and others will come to play. How do you not only turn that vote out now, but then sustain it? It's one of the big problems that the Democrats have is their base is deflated. Their base is looking somewhere else. They're not looking necessarily at Democratic candidates the way they did 2 years or 4 years ago. So there's a real challenge in front of Democrats to not just churn that base, but to push it out and get it to the polls. And as that evidence just showed, they're falling a little bit short, even in a state like Georgia.